This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so thank you very much, GoToMeeting Lady, for telling us that the recording has started. As people join, I'm just going to remind you to keep your microphone muted during the presentation. After we answer some of the questions in the chat, we'll also open up an opportunity for anybody who wants to unmute their microphone and ask a question. So it has been quite an interesting summer for all of us, and preparing for school has been a little bit different this year. And so Smithfield as a district has hosted 3 different family forums over the last month and a half. And this week and into next week, each individual school is hosting a family forum so that we could really get into the specifics about our schools and answer questions from our specific families. There may be some questions tonight that we don't yet have the answers for from either the state of Rhode Island, the governor's office, or the Rhode Island Department of Education, or the Rhode Island Department of Health. If we don't have the information, we'll be very honest with you and just let you know, and we'll make sure that we share that out with you once we do have that information. So if you have looked at Smithfield's reopening plan and all of those plans, I know Dr. Paolucci shared it out with families a few times. I shared it out with families, and it's also posted on the Rhode Island Department of Education website. It is long, so I wouldn't blame you if you haven't read the whole thing, but one of the most important parts of that plan are the principles that all of the teachers, staff, administrators, took into account as we were working on what would our plan look like to reopen schools safely and make sure that we're successful for students and families. So you'll see that there are really 7 things, and I'm going to refer back to some of these things throughout the presentation. So first and foremost, safety comes first. That obviously for not only just for students, but for staff members, that is crucially important. As a district and as a school, we'll be transparent. So you have received a lot of communication this summer, not just from me, but from Dr. Paolucci and from Dr. Monaco, and a lot of Facebook posts from the district and school. We're trying to make sure that we get out all of the information that we have so that parents have a secure feeling in that even if there are some questions that we don't have answers to yet, that we are making sure to share that information with everybody in a timely fashion. As a district and a school, will be equitable. So we want to try and find solutions that work as best as possible for every student and every family. So we don't want to just concentrate on a group of families or a group of students. We want to make sure that we're looking for solutions that are equitable across the board. We will listen. So one of the reasons that we're doing these family forums is to make sure that we're getting feedback and questions from our families. A lot of you have reached out to me over the summer, either via email or even sometimes over social media. That's been terrific, and I've really enjoyed having those conversations with you over the summer and hearing the challenges that you have and maybe the questions and anxieties that you've been thinking about in possibly sending your students back to school, or whether you should choose a virtual learning option, which we'll talk more about. So we're going to make sure that we keep listening to all the concerns from families. As a district, we'll be decisive. So we were given parameters by the state of Rhode Island, and we had to come up with a plan and be decisive and come up with options for all of our families and staff. So as part of our reopening plan, we needed to make sure that we weren't wishy-washy in what we were trying to do, that we had confidence in the plan that we came up with and the solutions that we're offering. That doesn't mean that we won't offer changes as information changes, which is the next thing, will be agile. So for example, we've already, all of us, had a little bit of a wrench thrown into the works when, surprisingly, the governor delayed the start of school until September 14th. That was not something that anyone had originally planned on. So all school districts had to change their plans a little bit, and as did families. And I know I heard from some families how disappointed they were in the governor's decision and that school was pushed back. And I can certainly understand that. I can tell you, though, that as soon as Smithfield knew about that decision, we started adjusting our plans. And then finally, we'll have expectations both for staff and for students. And we'll talk about that because there are going to be some different expectations this year in order to make sure that we're keeping staff and students safe while they're at school. So last year, you know that if you were at Old County Road as a family last year, you know that we rolled out some new school rules, and we worked really hard on them as staff, and we had just gotten into celebrating these rules and teaching them to kids when we needed to start distance learning last year. So I just wanted to bring these up because I think these rules are really important to our school culture, and we're going to make sure that we keep these rules in mind as we start school, whether that's in person, whether it's virtual option, distance learning, or a mix of all these different things. So we are going to be kind, we're going to be respectful to each other, and we're going to be responsible. And that being responsible obviously is going to look a little bit different this year in the choices that we all make. And then last but not least, I think this year we're going to need a few additional qualities that we're going to need to keep an eye on and practice to try and make this as safe and successful year as we can, and make sure that we're also doing it in a socially, emotionally healthy way. So we're definitely going to need patience with each other, with students, sometimes with the state of Rhode Island, like we talked about. They make changes that we don't necessarily expect. And so we're definitely going to need to demonstrate a lot of patience this year. We're going to need to be flexible. We've already been flexible as families and parents and teachers and staff and administrators. So we're going to continue to do that. And we know too that in 3 out of the 4 Smithfield elementary schools, we also have construction going on. So that's an additional variable that we're going to really need to demonstrate flexibility. And we'll talk a little bit about the construction shortly. And then last but not least, I truly feel we're going to need to be empathetic with each other. We're going to need to try and put ourselves in other people's shoes. There are going to be people that have some real challenges, whether they might be childcare, they might have a person at home that's medically fragile, people may get sick, people may have all kinds of challenges at home, and we're really going to need to make sure that we're taking into account how everyone's doing, how they're feeling, and checking in with each other, and also checking in with ourselves. So those are some additional things that we need to just be aware of as a school and as a community. All of these links I've sent out already, but I put them in the presentation, so when I send it out again, they'll all be in one place. So I think one of the challenges for families, and certainly for teachers and staff, has been there's lots of information out there, and sometimes it can be difficult tracking it all down. And we know, the state of Rhode Island has put up a new site, and the Department of Education has put up a new site. So I just wanted to list places that you should go to for information. And certainly you can reach out to me via email, and when we're back in the building, via phone. So the district itself, if you go to any district or school website, you'll see a big red link at the top for the latest COVID-19 information. And so the link is also there. That's where you'll find a link to the district's reopening plan, some FAQ documents. So there will be a frequently asked question document for Old County Road that's specific to our school. Hopefully that'll be posted either end of this week or early next week. There's an FAQ document for special education. Thank you very much, Mrs. Cradell. So that's already there. So we're keeping that page filled with all of the information that we have as a district, and all 9 of Dr. Paralucci's school reopening reports are also posted there. On our school website, you know that typically the email blast that I send out to families, I also post right on the news page. So if you miss something, you can go back and find it. And then finally, if you happen to get your news from social media, we have a school Facebook page and also a school Twitter page. You're welcome to follow us there as well. And then last but not least, like I had just alluded to, there are lots of different places to get information from the state and the various departments. So I will keep these links in this presentation because I think it's really important to be able to find the statewide information as quickly as you can when you have questions. So you don't have to try and jot these down or take pictures of them. I will share this presentation later with the links right in them. Okay, so let's start talking about our school and what's happening in our school and what our reopening plan is going to be. And so obviously, if you've driven by our school at all in the past month and a half, you see there's a lot of construction going on. So the front left corner of the building no longer exists. They took that down. So that's where the staff room was, one of our reading classrooms, the front entrance. So you can see in the picture, like that is gone, and that's where the new addition is going to be put up. You'll also notice that the parking lot on the north side, so if you're facing the school, the right side of the school and behind the school, is all torn up. And so there's a lot happening at school right now. And if you go by McCabe School, you'll also see McCabe has more construction than we do at the moment, and LaPerche is also under construction. So the summer construction work is scheduled by contract to be completed as of August 21st. That is when it is scheduled to be completed. Once the summer work is completed, district staff and myself, we're going to meet with Smithfield Police, fire, and building officials to go over what would be the safest traffic patterns for the new entrances we're going to be using at the school for this year, because obviously the main entrance in the front is no longer accessible. And in looking at what the parking lot looks like. So we're going to review all of that hopefully next week. But as soon as I have that information, I will make sure I get that out to families. I had a few families asking about it because they were trying to make informed decisions about the virtual learning option, which I think is terrific. I just don't have that information now because as you've noticed, if you go by the school, the parking lots are completely torn up. So as soon as that work is finished and we have those meetings with the town safety officials and building officials, I will get that information out to you. There will be construction ongoing throughout the school year at all three of these elementary schools. And there may be some areas of our school that we will not be able to use for student instruction. So for example, we're not going to be able to use our gym for student instruction this year. The gym is going to be used for some other purposes, and the gym roof is most likely going to be replaced as part of the construction that's happening during the school year. So obviously that would not be safe to have physical education classes in. So we're going to work with the construction company to see exactly what that schedule looks like. But there may be places in the school building that we normally use for instruction that we cannot. There are also places that are different. So right now I'm sitting in my new temporary office here at school. It's Miss Lemick it might look familiar to you because I'm really in the corner of room 104 that your space was. So Mrs. Diaz and I are going to be, there's a temporary wall that's in this classroom, and that's where the front office is going to be. Some teachers have moved around. So construction is going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I wanted to give families an update as to where we are, what you're seeing outside the school, and what the plan is. So student arrival and dismissal procedures are going to look a little bit different this year, not just because of construction, but also because of the physical distancing and the safety precautions that we need to take for students and for staff. I'm going to go through all of these. So the most important thing that families need to know, and I did send this out via email about 2 weeks ago, I believe, student arrival will begin at 8:10 this year. So that's 15 minutes later than it did this past year, which was 7:55 a.m. And the reason why is when students arrive, they need to report directly to their classroom. There will be no large school gathering in the morning. There will be no assemblies in the morning. Students will report directly to their classroom. And so we need to make sure that we have classroom spaces supervised for kids. So 8:10 is when that will start. The process that the district has shared with families, and just to make sure that you understand it, so families will screen students for COVID-19 symptoms daily before leaving home. And so the school district is going to supply parents initially with some paper tickets. And for elementary school, they look cool. It almost looks like a movie ticket. And there are 2 or 3 symptoms that we're going to ask parents to screen their child for every single day and mark down that their students or their children are not exhibiting these symptoms. And you're going to give that ticket, 1 per day, to your child before they leave home to bring with them to school. So they're going to have that ticket with them. As in the past, there will be separate entrances at the school for bus arrival and parent drop-off. Whether they're arriving via bus or via parent drop-off or even as walkers, there will be staff members at the entrances, and staff members will be taking those tickets and checking them to make sure that parents have verified that their children are not exhibiting any of the symptoms that are listed on the ticket. And there will be staff members checking student temperatures with no-touch thermometers. One of the questions that I received in the form that I sent out to families was, will schools be testing students for COVID-19 at the school? And the answer is no. We do not have the capacity for that. So we will be doing the temperature screening, and we will be asking families to do health screenings daily before the kids come to school. If your student's taking the bus, they're going to show the bus driver or bus monitor that they have their ticket before they're allowed to get onto the bus. If for some reason they lost their ticket, they were at the bus stop and it blew away, the bus will have some additional tickets to try and help with that. When students arrive, we're going to make sure that they're physically distanced, and I'm purposefully using the term physically distanced instead of socially distanced because we know that kids need to socialize. My own children at home, even though they're older, it's been a challenge not being able to socialize as much, as often, or in the ways that they were used to with their friends. So we want to keep students physically distanced to meet the safety requirements, but we don't want them to feel isolated. So you'll hear me using that term physically distanced throughout tonight. And then, as I already talked about, when they arrive, they'll report directly to their classroom. We will space them out so we won't have mobs of students going at the same time. And there will be no school-wide school meeting to begin the day each year. And that's something that is really hard for me because I felt like that really helped our school develop a wonderful culture last year. And you know that we had a lot of fun during school meeting. We used to have silly songs on Friday, but that's not something that we can do safely this year. So we will not be doing that this year. Other schools, elementary schools, they may have in the past been able to safely accommodate students outside for a few minutes of recess before school. They're also not going to be able to do that. So all of our schools need to make some adjustments this year. Dismissal, student dismissal will also begin a little bit earlier. So student dismissal is going to begin at 2:40 this year. And the reason for that is we need a little additional time to stagger the dismissal so that we don't have large groups of students congregating, that we can physically distance them. So what we will do is we will have separate exits, as in the past, for bus dismissal and for parent pickup. And we will stagger dismissal. And we've actually done this in the past as well, just we'll be very, very purposeful about it this year, in that we'll dismiss student or parent pickup and walkers before we start dismissing buses, and we'll dismiss buses one at a time and keep them distanced. And while they're lining up waiting for the bus, we'll also have students distanced in line. So that's what the procedures are going to look like this year for arrival and dismissal. And these procedures are going to look very similar at all 4 elementary schools. Timing might be slightly different, and obviously entrances and what it looks like at each school will be slightly different. The Department of Education updated their school transportation guidance on August 14th. So the current guidance is that a school bus can have a maximum of 50% of its seating capacity, not to exceed 36 passengers. So those are the numbers that the district is using to schedule and arrange for busing. So I know that Dr. Paolucci sent out a survey earlier in the summer asking families if they would be willing to opt out of busing to make more room for students. That was particularly important at the middle school and the high school. So these will be the numbers that we'll be using in order to make sure that the busing is following the safety guidelines. As we had briefly talked about before, students that are taking the bus in the morning, they will need to show their health screening ticket before they can get on the bus. Students will be required to wear a mask on the school bus. That is part of the ride guidance. Also, it's recommended, obviously for the school, that's not within our purview, but we would recommend that students are also wearing masks at the bus stop. But that's something that families will need to supervise when students are at the bus stop. Students will be required to sit facing forward on the bus, so they won't be allowed to turn around. Just like in a classroom, when we'll talk about the classroom, all students will be facing forward, and they will be spaced in the bus seats, whatever pattern fits the 50% of the vehicle seating capacity. So it could be 1 student per seat. There's been some talk about siblings being able to sit together on seats, but we will make sure that the pattern matches the guidance from the Rhode Island Department of Education. And then finally, each school bus is considered its own stable group. And the same group of students should be assigned to that specific bus each day. So that's a little bit different. So in the past, as a family, you might have written a note to say, please allow Paul to go home with Tom on bus 6 today, even though Paul normally takes bus 8. That's not going to be possible this year because we need to keep the buses in stable groups, and that is for contact tracing. So that's a little bit different, that guidance from the Department of Education. There's been a lot of discussion about mask wearing in schools. And again, this guidance has been updated throughout the summer, and it's changed a little bit. And the latest guidance from the Department of Education and Department of Health is that all students and staff will be required to wear masks while at school. So that includes kindergarten through 5th grade. Students will be able to remove their masks while eating and during scheduled mask breaks. So we know that wearing a mask can be a challenge. It's a challenge for staff as well as students. So teachers are going to work with their students to schedule some breaks during the day. Whenever possible, those breaks will take place outside, just to make sure that kids get a little break from wearing the mask. So families should send their children to school with at least one clean mask every day. If something happens and a student's mask gets dirty at school, or something else happens, they drop it in the sink, we will have some masks to be able to assist students with that here at school. And as I said, we know that wearing a mask is going to be challenging for some students and some staff members. So what we would encourage families to start doing, and some of you have already started doing this because I've received emails from you, which is wonderful, is to just start practicing wearing a mask at home now. And do it for short periods of time now. And as we get closer to the opening of school, just make them longer and longer periods. So children get used to wearing them, and it's building up their endurance and stamina. And of course, masks can be as fun as they want. It could be their favorite color. It can have a fun pattern on it. It just needs to be a mask that is effective against spreading COVID-19. And as we have more information about what types of masks those are, we'll make sure we share that with families. So physical distancing of students and staff, at the elementary schools, students will be assigned to a classroom pod. And you'll see I'm going to talk about that phrase classroom pod quite a bit. And students will remain with that group of students, the students in their classroom pod. So that, for example, might be Mrs. DeSlaurier's 2nd grade. So that may be a classroom pod. And they will stay with that group of students throughout the entire day. The purpose of classroom pods is primarily for contact tracing if a student or a staff member were to become ill and we needed to know who was in contact with that student or staff member. So for each student pod, teachers will be required to keep accurate seating charts, and those seating charts will be collected on a weekly basis. So we know on a school level where students were sitting, who they were sitting next to, so we can keep track of that. All of the elementary classrooms across the district have been redesigned and relaid out by the facilities director, Mr. Mancucci, and his staff, and they've been laid out to provide for maximum physical distancing between students. So the guidance from the CDC and the Rhode Island Department of Health has been between 3 and 6 feet, and we're getting as close to 6 feet as we can get. And as students may be choosing the virtual option, and families will take desks out and we'll spread desks out further in classrooms. We've also removed any other extraneous furniture in the classroom to make additional space. So see this, a quick picture of one of our classrooms, just basically what it will look like. Teachers will be allowed to put decorations up on the walls, but they'll need to be laminated for easy cleaning. So right now you'll see there's really no decorations in the classroom because teachers haven't been in to work in their classrooms yet. Students will eat lunch in their classroom with the students in their pod. So all students will eat lunch in the classroom. Their students will not be eating in the cafeteria at all this year, and that's consistent across all of the elementary schools. That's the same for snack and for breakfast, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Almost all classes and educational services will take place within the classroom pods, including art class, library class, music class, and health class. So those will be in the classroom pod. So those teachers will be coming to the classroom pod to teach those classes to the students. There will be some special education services and other specialized services, so maybe some reading services, maybe speech and language services that may be delivered outside of the classroom pod if there's no other way to deliver those services. If this is the case, we'll make every effort to keep those small groups of students that are normally in the same pod together. And we will, of course, keep them physically distanced when they're in a small group with one of those educators. Some physical education classes will take place in the cafeteria. So you know that I had mentioned before, our gymnasium is not available due to construction. Since we're not having lunches in the cafeteria, when we're not serving lunch, the cafeteria will be open and available. There won't be any tables in there. So we'll be able to have some PE classes in there. Students will remain with the students in their pod for physical education, and they will still be physically distanced, and they still will be required to wear masks. There may be some classes where the cafeteria is not available when they're scheduled for physical education classes, so those classes may take place in their classroom. So physical education will look different this year, and there will follow the guidance about physical exertion for students and making sure that the activities are safe and follow the guidelines. So for hallways, so if you know Old County Road School, it's not a square like LaPerte School where it goes around and then loops back on itself. So our hallways are going to be two-way, but the direction for the traffic will be separated by tape lines. So think about a road, and I have a little illustration here. So we're going to mark in the hallways. We've already ordered them and they've arrived, so we have them. We're just waiting until the floors are all cleaned. We're going to put down arrows showing the direction of the traffic flow on each side of the hallway, and we'll have a line down the middle of the hallway to indicate keeping distance and staying on your side of the hallway. We're also going to place those arrows on the floor in the hallway 6 feet apart. So when students are walking in the hallway, or if they have to be in line in the hallway for any reason, they'll have those visual guides to help them be physically distanced in the hallway. So teachers won't have to worry about trying to manually move students. We'll have those visual guides for them, which will be really helpful. Our stairways will also be two-way, and we'll mark them with tape and arrows to indicate, where the up and down is on what side. And in the cafeteria, when students are coming to pick up their lunch, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, we will, once we see what the traffic flow looks like in the cafeteria, we are going to put down dot decals to show students where they can stand while they're waiting to get their lunch and be served. So again, that way we can give kids some really simple visual reinforcement on how to physically distance. And we already have those dot decals here and delivered, and so we're ready to put those down. We will probably do that after we have a chance to see students come and get lunch for a couple of days with staff supervision, of course, so we can see where the traffic flow works best for the students. Student materials and supplies. So each student will have their own individual learning materials and supplies. So students will not be able to share materials and supplies with each other. We've already sent out what the supply lists are for students, and I'll send them out again. We're not asking families to send in a ton of supplies. We'll supply most of those here at the school, but we will keep them separate. So students will have, they might have their own book bin at their desk. I know one of the things that we put on supply lists were either pencil bags or pencil cases for kids to keep things in, but we'll make sure that each student has a clear place for their things. Reading is such an important part of our school and our students' education. We do want students to be able to utilize the classroom libraries. However, we need to do it in a safe way so that those materials are not being handed back and forth between students. So the way that that's going to work is within each classroom, there's a classroom library. Those books will stay in that classroom. They won't travel between classrooms. Students will be able to look at their classroom library. We, in the younger grades, a lot, we call it book shopping. So they'll be able to shop for books, but just using their eyes, and that'll be something that teachers go over with students and teach them and have them practice. They're not going to be able to touch the books as they're looking at them. When a student chooses a book, they'll be able to keep it in their book bin or their desk for as long as they need it. Once they're finished with it, each classroom will have a quarantine box where books will be returned, and those books will sit in the quarantine box for at least 2 days before they're put back into the classroom library. So that's how we'll make sure that we're still able to take advantage of our reading materials in the classroom, because we have so many wonderful and rich materials, but we can do it in a safe way and make sure that only one student is using it at one time. If that system works really well and the kids get used to it, we may also do something similar with library books for the school. But right now, we're not going to have students taking out books from the school library until we master the classroom library procedure, just to make sure that everybody knows the procedure and it's working well. So some of the other additional health and safety measures that the district has planned for and that we are ready to put into place here at school. So obviously we want students to wash hands frequently throughout the school day. And I know that makes Mrs. Fort smile anytime she hears that. And of course, particularly before and after eating, we want students to wash hands. Every elementary school will have hand sanitizer dispensers and stations in every classroom, every office, and at the entrance of each building. So all of our entrances that we have, there'll be hand sanitizing stations there. So actually we had work crews in our building this week putting those up, and so we should be good to go. They also put up brand new paper towel dispensers in every single classroom, every single office, to make sure that we have fresh and clean paper towels easily available. They automatically dispense, so kids don't need to actually touch the dispenser. So those were installed in our school this week. We have signs that'll be posted throughout the school building to encourage staff and students and visitors to follow the health and safety procedures that are in effect. And we'll also have signs at the school entrances. We will be reducing the amount of visitors to the school as much as possible. So for example, some parent meetings we may do virtually, because we really want to keep the people that are in and out of the school to a minimum to reduce any possible exposure or spread. There's been a lot of questions from families about cleaning protocols, and so I just wanted to let you know, and I put another link here so you could find it easily. There are very, very detailed and specific cleaning and disinfecting protocols listed in the district's reopening plan. So if you click that link, you'll be able to go through those. However, I wanted to pull out some of the important ones that parents have been asking about and families have been asking about. So we know that we need to change our cleaning approach and be more aggressive to make sure that we have a safe return to school. So things like all classrooms will be cleaned every night, and also after students eat lunch at their desks. So there was, you may have heard Dr. Paolucci talk about once students are done eating, the teacher will have some cleaning materials in his or her classroom. They'll have the students step away from their desks. The teacher will quickly spray the desk, and then the student will take paper towels and wipe the desk down. All of the products are safe for children and safe for schools, but that'll be the process, and that's something that's obviously very different because in the past, students have eaten lunch in the cafeteria. Restrooms will be cleaned no less than every 2 hours or after stable groups, depending on the schedule of each individual school. We've already talked about cafeterias. The lunch process it'll be grab and go. So it won't be the same process where kids are going through a line and they're sort of looking at what looks good, even though they're supposed to have ordered something and taking things. It'll all be prearranged and prepackaged so they can come and just grab the lunch and head right back into their classroom, to keep the lines moving, to keep kids separate, and to keep it as safe as possible. And then any shared spaces will be cleaned every night and also as needed when the occupants of the room may change. So for example, if there is a room that students are receiving special education services in small groups, when those groups change, we would need to quickly clean that space before a next group of students came in. So shared spaces like that, we would also clean in between. So those are some of the questions that people had about our cleaning protocols. I'm really pleased and proud of our custodial staff. I've been in and out of the building all summer long, and Mr. Regnier and Mr. Brock, they have done an amazing amount of work, not just because of all of the new protocols, but also because of construction. So we are really, really proud of our custodial staff, Mr. Regnier and Mr. Brock, and they're going to do a terrific job for us. They're both incredibly diligent, and the kids really enjoy them too. So I think it'll be a good teachable moment to show kids too, like this is the proper way to clean things. This is how we do things. Lunch and breakfast procedure. So we've already talked about students will be able to purchase lunch and breakfast, but it'll be a little bit different. They'll just be grab and go options. Um, Normally, students, when they come in, they would stop at the cafeteria and order their lunch. They would pick a colored chip and put it in a slot with the picture of what lunch option they wanted. It was very cool and very cute for the kids, particularly for the younger kids. We will not be doing that this year. So lunch orders will be taken from the classroom pod, and then those will be communicated to the front office, who will give that information to the cafeteria about who chose what lunch. As I've already mentioned, students will not be eating in the cafeteria at all this year. Breakfast, lunch, and snacks will be eating in their classroom pod. When we're ordering lunch, or I shouldn't say ordering lunch, when students are picking up lunch from the cafeteria, we will only have 2 grade level pods in the cafeteria at one time, because we'll have 2 separate serving stations on opposite sides of the cafeteria. So we can keep the classroom pods at least 14 feet apart. And we will not have more than 2 classroom pods in the cafeteria picking up their lunches at one time. And then they'll go bring them right back to their classrooms. And then those 2 serving stations will be cleaned before any other classroom pods come in to pick up their lunches. The principals have met several times with our food service staff about these procedures. And one of the things we made sure to build into our schedules, all 4 elementary schools, was adequate time to clean the serving stations between classroom pods. So that's what the procedures are going to be. And we'll make adjustments as we go if we find that there are things that aren't working as well as we'd like. A teacher or staff member will assist students in cleaning their desk after breakfast, lunch, or snack. And we've talked about that a little bit already. This next part is really, really important. And so typically we ask parents not to send in any nut snacks in the past, because students ate snacks in their classroom, and we didn't want students with allergies to accidentally come in contact with or be exposed to those nut products. But students could bring nut products for lunch, because students who are allergic to nut products, we had a separate nut-free table for them in the cafeteria. We're no longer able to do that this year, so all elementary schools are asking families not to send any nut products at all to school. And I know that can be a challenge for some families, particularly if you're a child, they only like that almond butter sandwich or that peanut butter cracker. But we really need your cooperation with this, because we need to make sure that all of our students are safe. And so that's going back to that will be equitable guidance that we came up with to guide our planning for this year. So I'll send more information and keep reminding families about that. But we're asking families do not send any nut products into school at all this year. Recess procedures. So students definitely are able to have recess, which they're going to need. They're going to need to move, and we're going to give kids opportunities to move and have movement breaks during the day as well. The current guidance from the Department of Education is that students will remain with their classroom pod during recess. So Mrs. DeSlaurier's 2nd grade isn't going to be able to play with Miss Kibbe's 2nd grade during recess. And I know that's difficult for kids if their friend is not in their classroom pod, but we need to keep the pods separate and keep kids in their pods even during recess. What we'll do is, I've already walked the outside facilities with Mr. Mancucci, our facilities director, and we're still under construction. So the fence is still in the way, and we have some things that the construction company needs to clean up. But we're identifying large enough spaces outside in the yard that will accommodate up to 4 classroom pods outside at once, and they'll be clearly marked. And so, for example, one week, Mrs. DeSlaurier's 2nd grade, they may be able to play on the basketball court, and Miss Kibbe's class, they may be able to play on the grass. We will rotate those areas once a week to make sure kids are getting opportunities to play in different spaces out in the yard. But classrooms will have to stay within their assigned space when they're outside at recess. And students will still need to remain physically distanced, and they still will need to wear a mask. And again, that's the latest RIDE guidance that we have, so that's important. We will not be sharing any equipment this year. We've talked about learning supplies and materials. The same goes with playground equipment. So all four elementary schools are looking at what types of things can we purchase for kids to be able to use without sharing outside. So we're still working on what those may be. We know that our classroom teachers and our physical education teachers are going to have some really creative ideas for us. And we're also, all four elementary schools have been through Recess Rocks training in the last 2 years. So we're also going to go back and refer to some of those resources to see, okay, what games might be able to play. Mrs. Plew was talking about this during her forum yesterday. One day we just might have a dance party outside, just to do something silly and keeps kids moving and physically distanced at recess. So we'll come up with some ideas to give kids ideas about what to do and have fun, but still be able to be safe. One of the things that is unfortunate for our school is we have that beautiful playground at Old County Road, and we have that absolutely gorgeous playground equipment. Currently, students will not be able to use that equipment because we cannot use shared equipment. We're going to keep asking questions and revisiting the guidance throughout the year to see if there's any way that we can safely allow any kids to be able to use some of that equipment at least, but at least for the current beginning of school, we are not going to be able to use that equipment. And then we'll keep revisiting and looking at it as the school year goes and see if there are ways that we can do it safely. We truly don't have the capacity to wipe down every piece of playground equipment in between every recess. So we're going to have to be creative and figure some things out. There have been a lot of questions from parents about special subject areas. And as some of you know, my wife is a music teacher in Smithfield, and in a former life in a galaxy far, far away, I was an elementary music teacher. So this is a topic that's really dear to my heart. So all elementary students will still be able to have art, library, music, physical education, and health classes this year. And health classes are just for 4th and 5th grade. But the schedule is going to look different. We're still working out all those details. We do have a draft schedule ready. So how it might look different, an example of that is, so all students by law need to have physical education a certain amount of time every week. So for us, students will have phys ed twice a week or phys ed and health twice a week. The other specials, they're only most likely going to have 2 other special subject areas per trimester. So for example, this first trimester, students may have, they're going to have physical education twice a week, and then they may have art and music, or they may have art and library, or they may have music and library. And then in the second trimester, they'll shift off of music and have art. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to reduce exposure of students with staff being itinerant through classes, but also we want to reduce exposure for those staff members. So our itinerant music, art, and librarians, they go to 2 schools, so they might see 500 kids a week. And so by doing this, it cuts the amount of students they see in week by half. So that's what we're looking at so far. All special area subjects will take place in the classroom pods. So music will be in the pod, art, library, health class. Physical education classes are the exception. They'll take place in the cafeteria whenever it's possible, whenever it's free. They also may take place outside if outside is free, if recess isn't happening. If that's not possible, then phys ed will also take place in the classroom pod. So activities will look a little bit different this year. But I'm confident that our specialists will have some creative things to do with kids, and I know that they're already working on some ideas for that. In music class this year, so music is going to look different in particular because according to the guidance, students are not able to sing. So when you're singing, you're expelling a lot of airborne particles that we don't want to happen in an enclosed space. So there won't be any singing in school in music class this year. That's really hard for me personally because one part of our culture these past 2 years has been all of the silly songs that we know, and the kids have really enjoyed singing them together, particularly the younger kids. So that's going to be something that we're just not going to be able to do this school year. The same thing for wind instruments. So our 3rd and 4th graders learn to play recorder in music class, and our 5th graders learn to play band instruments in class. We're going to have to find some alternatives to that this year. So just letting you know that there will be some alternatives to music and the music teachers are across the district are starting to look at what those alternatives would be. And then within special area classes, students will again have their own sets of supplies and materials. So we'll use that same safety guideline. So I'm going to take a breath for a second because that's a lot of information, and I know it's a lot for families also to digest. One of the most prevalent questions that I received, and I have all of your questions up on another screen here that you've sent to me over the past week in preparation of this forum, is what does a typical day look like, or what would a typical day look like? And even pre-COVID-19, I don't know if there's a typical day in an elementary school, but I wanted to walk families through what a day may look like so you have a really good idea what your kids would be able to expect. So I'm just going to quickly do that briefly because we've really covered everything, but I want to do it in order real quickly. So families are going to screen students for COVID-19 symptoms prior to the students leaving for school. When students arrive at school, they'll present their screening ticket and they will have their temperature checked by a staff member. Students will report directly to their classroom pod, so there won't be any lingering or assemblies or gathering. Students will learn throughout the morning in their classroom pod while staying physically distanced from other students. So they'll be at their desk. One of the things we did suggest for families to send in is a beach towel. So if some students want to sit down next to their desk, or there's some activities that it makes sense for them to be sitting on the floor, or if as a movement break, they're going to lie on the floor and do some stretches and some different things. That's what the beach towel is for. And the reason we're asking for a beach towel is it's something that students can easily bring home and can be washed. Whereas district wide and school by school, we looked at the possibility of yoga mats, but trying to wash and disinfect those on a daily basis is probably not the best approach. So throughout the morning, students will be learning in their pods. Teachers will arrange for movement breaks and mass breaks. So as they get to know their kids in their class, they'll know, when they need those breaks. Mass breaks, whenever possible, will take place outside. So when weather permitting, those will be outside. And teachers will use the schedule that works best for their classroom and their students. When it's time for lunch, students within a pod who are purchasing lunch will walk down to the classroom. They'll stay distanced. They'll take their grab and go lunch and they'll bring it right back to their classroom pod. All students within a classroom pod will eat lunch together and they'll stay at their desk, so they'll be physically distanced. They could certainly sit on the floor with their beach towel if they wanted to have sort of a picnic, but they've got to be physically distanced while doing it. All students within the classroom pod will then go to recess together. We have some classes, grade levels, that are going to have recess before lunch to make everything work schedule-wise, because we can only have a certain number of classes out at recess at a time. We have to space out lunch, but all students in the classroom pod will have recess together. We will have recess outside whenever possible, and every classroom pod will have their own area to play in, and the areas will be clearly delineated, and they'll be separated by at least 14 feet. After recess or after that lunch, they will return to their classroom pod to learn for the afternoon. At some point in the school day, it depends on the grade level. It could be in the morning or it could be in the afternoon. A special subject area teacher will come to the classroom pod to teach art, library, music, health, and a classroom pod may also go to the cafeteria for physical education. And then at the end of the school day, dismissal will be staggered for students that are being picked up and students that are walkers and students that ride the bus. And we'll stagger how we call those buses to be able to keep them separate. And then we want to maintain those stable bus groups together throughout all the days of the week. So that's what a typical day will look like. There are many, many, many small things that will go into this and that'll happen in the classroom that I couldn't go through quickly or easily necessarily, but as teachers and kids get into the new routines in their classroom, there will be things that happen in the classroom to make learning fun, to find new and creative ways to learn within these guidelines and to try and take advantage of some of the things that we have in our school and classrooms. So one of the things I wanted to make sure that families knew is we didn't forget about making school fun for kids. I think even during distance learning last year, and I put some pictures up and a link to one of the YouTube videos that the staff made, Our staff really did a tremendous job, teachers and staff, of finding ways to make distance learning fun for kids. So there are some pictures of kids and some of our very spirit days. We had all kinds of different things and ways to make it fun and unique for kids. We will do that throughout this entire year, whether we're in person, whether your child is taking a virtual learning option, or everybody in Smithfield is doing distance learning. So we know how important it is for learning to be fun and joyful for elementary students and also for elementary teachers, staff, and principals. So we certainly did not forget about that. I just wanted to publish some answers from some of the questions people sent, and then I'm going to ask the people who are helping out and monitoring the chat to let me know what other questions might be out there. So one of the questions, very frequent question that came up is, what will the school do if someone is ill or becomes ill? And so you might have heard last, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the Rhode Island Department of Health published what they're calling a playbook. It's really called the Outbreak Response Protocol for pre-K schools. And so that's published online for anyone to see. So we will be following that protocol. So I literally have it next to me on my desk. Mrs. Fort has thoroughly reviewed it, and she's attending training on all of these things. And so we'll make sure that we're following those exact protocols. We will not simply just do that, though. We will also communicate directly with the Rhode Island Department of Health and follow any other specific guidance that they might provide. So if we think that we have a student who's exhibiting symptoms or staff, not only will we follow the guidance in the playbook, but we will also reach out and contact the Department of Health. So that's what we will do in those situations. The playbook has sort of the different options, so you can certainly look and take a look at that. And that playbook and protocol may change throughout the year. So if it does, we'll let families know and we'll send you out the new link for that. There have also been a lot of questions from families about the virtual learning option. And so the district, Dr. Pierlucci a few weeks ago sent out an initial survey with some information for families about what a virtual learning option would look like for families either for medical or personal reasons didn't feel comfortable sending their children back yet to school for in-person learning. The district is handling all of the details and information for that. So you need to look at what Dr. Pierlucci is sending out. Some of the details are still being finalized because we're still seeing how many families are interested, what grade levels are the students in that families are interested, how will that impact a specific school. So some of those details are still being worked out. What I can tell you is I had a number of parents ask me, Mr. Barrett, I forgot to sign up for virtual learning, or I didn't think I wanted to take that option for my child and now I do. How do I do that? Or conversely, I chose virtual learning option initially, and now I don't want to do that. I think I really want my child to go to school. So if you look at the latest news from Dr. Pierlucci that she's posted on the district webpage rather, that form allows you to still sign up. And she did not publish a deadline for that. I would encourage you to do it as quickly as possible if that's the way that you think you'd like to go, because it does help us with preparations. But if you did sign up for virtual learning and you're thinking that's not a good fit for your family or your child, you can also go to that second form that she sent out and indicate that you would not like to do virtual learning. So we actually had an Old County Road family do that today once they knew that they had that option. Once the governor makes the statewide decision, and that currently is scheduled to happen August 31st, although we know the first decision was scheduled for the 17th and that got switched. So it is possible that that date still could be switched. But once that decision is made, we'll know much more and we'll have some final details to share with families. But that was again, one of the most important questions I think that families were asking. So that's pretty much the presentation I have, but I know there's probably lots of other questions out there. And for me, I'm not able to sort of monitor the chat while I'm doing this. So either Mrs. Crudell or Mrs. Plew, let's start with you. Are there any questions that you think either I need to know and be able to answer or you would like to answer? And feel free to unmute yourself.
One of the questions was about dismissal and the Y bus, and one of the parents was wondering whether or not that procedure would be the same, that bus would be called in line with other buses. So I didn't know if you could speak a little bit about that.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. We will treat, if there is a Y bus, and we know that the Y program also, they may be making some changes. And for the first time in a long time, the after school Y program is not going to be at Oak County Road because of construction and we don't have a gym. I believe it's going to be held at William Windsor this year. So if there is a Y bus, we will call that bus separately as if it were any other numbered bus and keep those kids separate and distant from other buses. So we would follow the same bus procedure, just use the Y bus as another bus.
Okay, Mr. Barrett, we had a lot of great questions and thank you very much for them, but we have one that you might want to add, anything you know about this. It was with construction going on, what are precautions being taken to prevent potential asbestos spread? Now, I did mention that we could certainly contact Mr. Mancucci, our facilities director, our building and grounds, and that he would have the extended information about this.
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and it is something that I know the district took seriously and considered, and I know that there were abatement processes in place, but Mr. Mancucci, the district facilities director, is the expert in that area. So there are a couple of ways that we can approach this. One is I can reach out to him and see if there's some information he has that I can easily share with families. The other thing that families are always welcome to do is on the district website, all of the central office administrators, like Mrs. Crudell, who's here with us tonight, their contact information is also listed there. So you're welcome to reach out to Mr. Mancucci as well. Obviously, he is incredibly busy right now with trying to get all of these schools ready for school reopening plus construction. But he's terrific. And so I will reach out to him and see if he's got information I can share, but also families can reach out to him directly. Thank you so much, Mrs. Plouffe.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions that came up that were things that I really need to address or things that came up frequently?
This is Mrs. Ford.
Oh, go ahead, Mrs.
Some
Ford.
concerns. Sorry, just so one suggested for new transfer students or new students, what is being done so they can come visit since they can't visit in person? Is there any plan for that, of helping them transfer to get used to the new school, whether they be new kindergartners or upper grades?
That's a terrific question. And so we're discussing what those options might look like, and we'll be reaching out to those families. So one of the things that we need to wait and see is what's happening with the construction. And when that, even though it's scheduled to be completed by the 21st, the summer work at least, we need to see when it would be safe to invite those families in, and we need to do it in a staggered way. For kindergarten in particular, and Mrs. Plouffe, you can join in and add anything that I might miss. We're, as a district, all 4 elementary schools, we're refining our kindergarten screening procedures now. So for incoming kindergarten students, for example, we don't have them assigned to teachers yet, because part of the process of getting to know them and their family getting to know the school is we have kindergartners come in small groups, and we do what's called kindergarten screening, where we find out what they know. We give them some structured play. We see how they socialize with adults and other kids. And so we're looking at how we can do that in a safe way within the guidelines that we have. So for kindergarten, there'll be very specific screening procedures, and we'll talk about, also how you can come into the school for that.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is parents, just be patient. We will get that information in terms of dates out to you. We're still just trying to tweak a few things with the help of the kindergarten teachers. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, that was one of those 3 additional, I think, things we're going to have to keep in mind this year. Patience is definitely one of them. So thank you so much, Mrs. Plouffe. Anything else that came up that is really important for us to or at least try and address tonight? And of course, there are other things that if we don't have the information tonight, when we do have it, I'll send out like those traffic patterns for drop off and pickup.
This is Mrs. Ford again. One of the parents wrote in that they're concerned about ventilation, and it would be helpful if this could be proactively addressed and communicated with parents. Like, how are they addressing the ventilation?
Sure. So Dr. Pierlucci did put some information about ventilation in her last reopening report, which I think was reopening report number 9, which was the latest one. But I can tell you exactly what was there and what we've discussed as a district. So all of these schools' HVAC systems have been inspected, and they've been optimized for their greatest potential for this school year. All the filters have been changed. If you have specific questions about what types of filters, you can certainly reach out to Mr. Mancucci. Some other things that we're looking at in terms of ventilation, the guidance from the Rhode Island Department of Education and Department of Health is we're going to keep windows open as much as possible. So any room that has windows, we will keep them open. And we also are going to be looking at using fans. The guidance from the Department of Education is fans, if at all possible, should not point directly at students. And at Old County Road, and I believe in the other elementary schools as well, in most of the classrooms, we have wall-mounted oscillating fans that have been there for a while, so they don't point directly at kids. And so we will be keeping those fans running, because one of the things that we know is if we can keep the temperature as comfortable as possible, it will make it much easier for people to keep their masks on. If it's 90 degrees in the classroom, it's really difficult to be comfortable and keep a mask on. So those are all of the things that the district has decided upon and is doing in terms of ventilation.
And there is another question. If the children are opting out of an in-person learning, will you be able to make a list available of other students who have also opted out from within their classes? We could potentially set up pods outside of school for play and peer interaction.
That's something that we can absolutely look at. What I'll need to do, and Mrs. Plew and I would need to do it together, we'll have to talk with the superintendent and assistant superintendent to see what types of information we would be able to share. I'm sure that once school started after a week or so, kids would probably figure it out too, but I agree, it would be nice if families could start to make some arrangements on their own. But we also do have to be really careful about student privacy. So that's something that I would need to work with the superintendent and assistant superintendent on to see what we could share.
Add this one. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to go?
Oh, no, Mr. Brad, there was a question about if a child has a cold and isn't allowed to go to school, can he or she do the virtual option so they don't miss the school or learning since they can't be in person?
Yes, that's a terrific question. Absolutely. So if a student is exhibiting symptoms, because we're really going to be very strict about if a student is exhibiting symptoms that are in that Rhode Island Department of Health protocol guide that I talked about, the playbook, they're going to need to stay home. And in the past, that might have been something like my own kids would say, okay, no, you need to go to school, you're fine. That's just not something we can do this year. We have to be really mindful of each other and keeping each other safe. So the district has arranged for, on those days, kids to be able to sort of pop in and out of the virtual learning option, and we will mark their attendance using a special code, so they will show up as being present. So their attendance isn't going to suffer for that. So we also don't want, some families' attendance is really important to them. So we don't want families to worry about, Paul has, he has a new cough. He really should be staying home, but I worry about, him racking up lots of absences. That wouldn't be the case. If they're well enough to participate in virtual learning, they can do that and still be marked present. So we'll have more information about that to share with families. That's a terrific question. Thank you for that.
And then there was just posted a follow-up question of if a child has a runny nose and is marked on the bus ticket due to allergies, will they be refused to go on the bus?
So that's something that Mrs. Fort and I are asking questions about too. So I reached out to Mrs. Fort about that about a week ago because a few families had asked about that. I also personally have seasonal allergies in the fall. And so according to the outbreak response protocol guide, runny nose by itself is not a symptom that would prevent them coming to school. So runny nose by itself would not be a symptom. They would need at least one other symptom that falls in the guidance. That might be something too, and Mrs. Fort, you can chime in here too. I'm thinking that these are situations too we might have to take on an individual basis, and we might have to work with families in their primary care position also.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I did listen to Dr. Klein at the Department of Health speak directly about this. And she says if it's within their realm of their normal, typical symptomology. So I think going forward, we'll take it case by case.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Fort, for doing that. I really appreciate it. And I know that, that's something that families are concerned about. Anything
Absolutely.
else that's come up that we think we really want to make sure that we talk about or address?
Mr. Bader, I'm just going to chime in a little bit. So the high school meeting just ended, and one of the things that was learned was that teachers were being encouraged to record classes, and a number were planning to live stream for students on the virtual option. So the question would be, will you be encouraging OCRS teachers to do the same?
So that's interesting to hear that the high school talked about that tonight, because I know that's something that the district is investigating, and they've reached out to me as principal because I have a technology background as well, to see if there might be some pilot classrooms at our school that would be willing to do that, but we have not made any specific plans for that yet. We also have to figure out not just the technical capability, but what is the comfort level of the teacher? How do we handle student privacy? So maybe I'm wondering if maybe the high school has already worked out some of their own procedures, but we do not have specific details about that yet for elementary schools. If and when we do, I will absolutely share those with families, and we'll talk about how that might work at Old County Road. Thank you, Mrs. Plew. That's really interesting information that I hadn't heard before tonight. One of the things that we found worked well last night in the McCabe and Windsor parent forums was, at this point, because most people have gotten their questions out, bless you, if there's a parent who really has a question that they'd like to ask, if you want to try and unmute yourself and ask that, we can do that for a few minutes just before we wrap things up for tonight. So if there's any family that might want to try unmuting their microphone and asking a question directly, we can absolutely give that a try.
Mr. Barrett, I have a question regarding if the child is sick and if they can go on to virtual learning. Is that almost going to be almost the same way as we did with the distance learning?
It will be a little bit different. That's a great question. So virtual learning will be different. So distance learning was pretty much all the students learning together at the same time. So a fancy way of saying that would be synchronous. Virtual learning is going to be asynchronous. So kids will be doing certain assignments and projects not necessarily at the same time. Teachers might record certain things and push them out so families can do them together or kids can try them together. There may be some presentations that pushed out, so it won't be exactly the same as the distance learning. That's why the superintendent didn't call it a distance learning option, because it is not exactly the same. So that's a great question.
So we will be able to get on to, if we were to do virtual learning because the child was sick, we'd be able to get onto our child's Chromebook and like go right into her classroom?
So you'd be able to go into that Google Classroom. You wouldn't have a live view into what's happening in the physical classroom necessarily, because right now, elementary schools, we don't have plans for live streaming classes. And there are a lot, we talked a little bit about why that might be the case. The high school looks like is going to give it a try with some of those classes to start. However, even if your child doesn't have their Chromebook, because if your child is sick that day, they probably aren't going to have their Chromebook home, right, if they've been at school. Right. So you can still access their Google Classroom through any device you might have at home. Your child would just, you would have to know your child's login information like they use for their Chromebook, but you absolutely could do that. So PC, Mac, iPad, any of those things.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the question. Any other questions from families?
Hi, Mr. Barrett.
Hi.
Hi. So, I just have, actually have two questions. One, was it not considered at all to do the 50% like they're doing at the high school?
That's an excellent question. And so I'm going to answer it the best way that I can.
Wasn't on it, and then I wrote back and I was like, I want Eileen Cordell on it.
I'm gonna mute while I answer this. Okay. So the focus and priority for the Rhode Island Department of Education when districts were making their learning plans and reopening plans was for elementary students to receive in-person instruction. So the initial instructions from the Rhode Island Department of Ed did not include an option for elementary schools for like a 50-50 or an A, B, and B day option for elementary schools. Middle school and high school have those options. Now, we've seen the governor change some of the guidance over the last couple of weeks, including dates. So it's certainly possible that we may hear that the governor or the commissioner of education may say, we're changing things and we might offer that. And then we'd have to look at how we would do in the elementary school. But that wasn't an option that was given to districts. That was really, you might have read in the paper or heard on the news or social media, some district plans did include days off or A, B, and B days for elementary schools, and their plans got pushed back and they had to make some changes. So right now, there is not an option for like a 50% in person for elementary students, but it's certainly possible the state could change that guidance. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the second question, that would be great.
Thank you. So the concern that I have with distance learning for my child in particular is that he's going into first grade. And well, you know, we did well in the spring. I'm just concerned about whether or not the younger children will have the ability to understand the information that is given by the teachers in like a file. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And so one of the things that we're really fortunate about is I think Smithfield in general and certain Old County Road School and the 4 elementary schools in a very short amount of time last March, they were able to get distance learning up and running. And I think as a district, Smithfield really did a terrific job with distance learning. But you're right, it was a challenge for some kids and for some families. We've been able to look back on that and learn from some of those things and make some adjustments. So if we do need to go to distance learning this year, we can make some changes to that. The other thing is even for the younger kids, the instructions from the teacher or the lesson wouldn't necessarily be through a file. So like, you know, a 3rd grade teacher might be able to push out a Google Doc with some prompts to a student, and they might be able to take that and be able to work on it on their own for a while and then come back and work with the teacher. Obviously, kindergarten, 1st grade, and even some 2nd graders, that might be a challenge. So they may be doing more live video back and forth with the teacher. So we'll make adjustments based on the age level, but we do know that distance learning can be a challenge for some kids and families, and we'll do everything that we can to try and make it work as well as possible for everyone. If the state does decide that we're going to distance learning, that's something that we just have to do. We don't have an option not to do that. But we did have an opportunity to learn from last year, and so we will make adjustments based on what we learned, and we'll do the best we can for all of our students if that's a situation that we need to go in.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Maybe one more question because we're past time, but this is important and I don't want to cut people off. I feel like I'm on a radio show, like I'm waiting for a caller to call in. So again, thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight. And I can't thank enough First of all, Mrs. Crudell and Mrs. Plew for coming to help us out with the chat. That was a huge, huge help, and having you here really helped me feel more comfortable, and I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate Miss Lemick and Mrs. Fort for giving up their personal time tonight to come and interact with families and help me out and answer questions. So thank you so much to both of them. I will, so this meeting was recorded. So once I have the recording, I will send it out to all families so that every family can take a look. I will also share the presentation itself that I use with all of the links and information. So nobody has to worry about if they miss something, you'll be able to go back and refer to it. And I will continue to, like all of the elementary schools have been doing, to regularly communicate with families. So we've been sending out a lot of emails to families. Posting those emails with the same information to the school websites so that you can refer back to them, and also doing social media posts. So we'll make sure that we continue to do that because we really want to be not only as transparent as possible, but we know that families really need the latest and greatest and most accurate information possible for you to make the best choice for your family. So we'll continue to do that. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a terrific rest of the week. The weather has been amazing this week, and I hope it continues so that kids get outside, play a little bit, even adults, before we start school in a few weeks. Thank you so much.